Namaste, welcome to the Zensei Podcast. Today I have with me a good friend and a fellow flow game host from Brazil. We met a year ago in Denmark during a flow game host training. What drew my attention to her work was the passion and the curiosity that she brought into the projects that she invested her energies in. A solopreneur in the field of education and human development since 2017, she takes a multidisciplinary approach to the things that she has set out to do. Her mission is to be in the service of the creative impulse in all human beings, and she's committed to dialogue practices, believes in their magic as she works through art of hosting, flow game, collective presencing, and bomb-inspired dialogue. Join me in this conversation with Amanda Zamparo as we delve into some of these very interesting themes around her work with communities and with herself. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I look forward to your reflections and feedback. Thank you. Hello, Amanda.
Hello.
Glad to have you at the Sensei Podcast.
Hello.
Yes. I've been giving the introduction about you before this, and I was touching upon few of the key things that you do, amongst other things like facilitation and flow game, art of hosting. So there's a lot of very interesting intersectionality to your work, and part of today's conversation is also to get to know more about your journey into this world, and also to understand better in doing what you're doing, what are you really trying to do, what is the underlying grammar and rhythm of your journey. So I think I'll just let you introduce yourself too. How would you describe who you are and what you do to someone who is completely unaware of this world of facilitation and dialogues?
hmm Well, that's always a challenge, to be honest. Um, I've started to introduce myself as a dialogic consultant, so I I help teams and people in groups to arrive at more coherence through dialogic practices like the flow game and also other dialogue practices like boom inspired dialogue, and collective presencing also has been a big part of my journey. So I have been really focusing on these practices and really exploring the power that they bring to collectives to really it's always surprising for me when I work with a group how these practices can really unlock collective intelligence and collective wisdom. So I've started going deeper and deeper into them.
Great. I think, like we say in flow game, when we try to craft a question, I think one of the pointers I remember is every question acquires its power in a context. What is your context that inspired you to get into the dialogic space and also to explore this power of working with communities in collectives? What was your context? Maybe it's a good time to also share about where are you from and
Yeah.
what this journey. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm from Brazil, and maybe I can share the story of how I was introduced to the flow game. Specifically, I was part of an innovation program in São Paulo. It was for young entrepreneurs. It was a 6-month program. And every day we would have a different workshop with a different facilitator. And one day we had a flow game session with Valentine, which was the only Brazilian flow game host at that time. She was the only one. And I remember I was working with sustainability in the field of recycling in Brazil. I worked in a small consultancy, and in Brazil, the ecosystem of social innovation is so rich, and there are so many uh, NGOs and startups doing really great work. And I was part of this ecosystem. And when I got in touch with the flow game, something happened. I was, in a way, I felt like a reconnection to something that, in a way, felt very familiar to me. Um, and something that I really longed for, that kind of depth. And my question at a time was about becoming financially independent. That was my first flow game question ever. Because I was living in São Paulo. It's a very expensive city, and I was not making enough money with the work I was doing. So that was my initial context coming into the practice. But I was really called to go for it, to become a host. So I went to Austria. I gathered all my money, and I left the organization I was working for, and I went to Austria to get trained. And that's when, that's when things started. That's when my solo journey started as an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. So maybe since you mentioned flow game as one of the factors in this starting of the journey, many of our listeners may not be aware of what exactly flow game is. So how would you describe the uniqueness and what is it
Mhm.
all about? What is this flow game?
Yeah. So the flow game is a game, but it's a serious game, I would say. It's a game where we bring really important questions about our lives. I think there are similar games out there, I've heard, but I've never played other similar games. And what I love about it is that it really confronts people with the biggest questions of our lives. And in the same way, it's such an individual process because you come into your to the game with your own question. It's also a very collective process because we then are asking for help. You know, it's funny because it used to be something, I guess, more common that we would ask for help from our community when we were making a big decision. I don't know, at least some cultures, maybe indigenous cultures. But now, like with the way we are so individualistic, to ask for help from a circle and a community, it's something in a way almost revolutionary. So people have to adapt in a way and have to relearn how to do it. And I think the flow game is very good for that because it really invites that sense of vulnerability and compassion. At the same time, it is very encouraging and invites us to action. So it's not just a healing practice, or it's therapeutic, but it's not therapy. And at the same time, it's also very action oriented, in the sense that, yeah, hopefully after a flow game session, we're able to gain clarity about something and then move in our lives with that. Yeah. Does that, does that help?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the things that brought me to flow game was also having an important question to ask and the magic of exploring the question in a collective setting. And I do resonate with what you shared. I think as a society we are going and becoming more and more individualistic, it does feel a lot of courage is required to ask a question that's really mattering to you in an open collective space. So thanks for sharing that. Let me also just go a little bit further in that line since we are on the topic of flow game.
Mhm.
Flow game can be played in different settings. We can play it at a personal level with organizations and teams, with families. So one of the things that first time I heard about you when another flow game host introduced me to you was some of your work with couples and around the theme of relationships through flow game. So, and I know this is also part of your larger journey and exploration in other spaces. So, how have you explored the idea or the theme of relationship through flow game? What has it been like?
Mhm. So, mm, when I was in a relationship here in Brazil, I would play with my partner, and I think that's where I started to feel the potency of the practice for couples because I was bringing it to my own relationship and experiencing how much the game would open the conversation in the relationship to a new level of intimacy, but also um, the quality of our communication would change because of the practice and the intentionality of the practice. And it's also a great practice to bring projects to. So when we had like a project together, we would bring to the flow game and think together, like, how can we make this project flourish, as a team. Um, so it was helpful throughout the relationship. And then I also offered to a few couples who were considering to have children, and they wanted to bring that question to the game, or they were already pregnant. I played with two couples who were already pregnant, and they wanted to play the game to think of how can we prepare for becoming parents? How can we prepare to motherhood and fatherhood? And it was really, really beautiful. And there was also another couple who really wanted to have children, but they were a bit unsure and indecisive, or just a little bit fragile in that decision. So I think, again, like a baby or children, it's a project, it's a life project. So it's also something that the flow game can help. Yeah.
So would you
Yeah.
say it has a therapeutic effect? Is it more like a relationship counseling or is it something different?
I think it really depends how you use it. The way I was using, I could see how it was really helpful. Like the last time I offered was another couple, and for their question was more related to how can we create a sense of safety in our relationship. And it was not connected to any project that they had or any big decision, but it was more about bringing a quality that was missing in the relationship. And it was really, really good. That session was one of the best sessions I ever hosted, because in a way I acted as a mediator for them. So in points of, when there's miscommunication, where needs are not being seen, we can bring that level of another listening, because it's a third person. We're coming from the outside, and we can look at it from another angle, and we can provide a reflection that is fresh. It's a fresh perspective. So they were able to listen to each other and see each other in a new way that they were not being able to do it by themselves. And then later, that couple, now they are engaged. So there was really a sense that the session was important to bring a sense of stability, and like, okay, we are together, we're doing this, for the long run. And I was really happy to hear that they are engaged. And I think one interesting thing about the flow game is that, for example, this couple, one of them was a friend, a very dear friend. So it's not like in therapy where the therapist has to be completely neutral and not, it's not that cold. It's a little bit more natural. And I mean, I still need to be very aware that I have I have responsibility when I'm hosting, and I have to do my best to give both people the chance to, express themselves. But the rules of the game and the process is designed to allow that. So when we use a talking piece, when we make the flow game is in rounds, right? So each person has their own round, they have their own space. And so there is, um, let's say, equality in the way that the process works. Yeah.
Beautiful. I think I think we did host one based on relationship few months back in February. Uh, I think what I myself experienced slightly differently from other open sessions where each one brings their own questions is while the diversity of questions has a different kind of a magic and value, when everyone is coming with a question around relatedness, I see that the group itself becomes like a mirror to help each person see more than what they were seeing about their
Mhm.
own dynamics and things. Yeah, but I've not worked with couples yet, so that
Hmm.
is a fresh perspective to hear how it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and there was also a time when this was very spontaneous. I didn't plan for it, but I worked also with a family. It was a mother and three daughters, and they were grieving the death of the father. he was actually assassinated. So, and that was interesting because she asked me, like, she knew that I had the flow game with me, I was traveling, and she asked to play it. And during the session, they brought questions that were not related to the father. Like, they brought questions about work and, other things. And throughout the game, inevitably, the thing emerged. The grief and what was really there emerged. Because a family is a living system, right? And a couple is the same. It's a living system. So they have ways of operating. There are dynamics that are maintaining themselves. And so there's a homeostasis, let's say, in the system. And then when you come with an intervention like the flow game, there will be a disorganization in the system so that the system can reorganize at a new level. What I learned working with couples and families is that we have to sometimes intervene at specific times to break this pattern of the system. So what happened, for example, in that session was that one of the daughters started speaking, and I think she got emotional, and the mother immediately jumped in to intervene and speak. And I asked her, no, let's listen. Let's listen to her. So I interrupted that pattern, and then there was like a relief that everyone could feel. At least I could feel, and I think they could feel too, because that daughter was able to just, release her tears without feeling that it was a problem. So this is something I learned, that sometimes we have to know where and when to intervene in when working with family systems. Yeah, and I'm now doing also a postgrad program to learn more about this dynamics and what kinds of what kinds of questions we ask is really important, because the flow game provides us with questions, right? But sometimes the connection that the person makes, sometimes they can't make a connection with you know they have a question, the flow games provides another question, and they can't make a direct connection. And then you're seeing the connection, and you can provide, oh, what about this? Have you thought about this? Or what if we could interpret in this way? What do you think? Does that make sense? So you can, like that.
No, no, I was just remembering as you were speaking about the only one family game I hosted last year. It was so powerful, and I also feel that sometimes those patterns are the toughest to work with. You can compared to a general group, stranger group coming together, or even a team in an organization
Yeah.
dialoguing. It's more tougher and more courageous to do that. So yeah, I think in that way I could see how it impacted the relational space within the family, and so yeah, I think I look forward to having more co-hosted flow games with you on this theme. And those of you listening, we also have a game coming up later this month on 22nd of June. So if you're interested, the links will be available in the comment. And that's just an aside. But coming back to your journey, Amanda, you mentioned a couple of things at the start. Your game came in that context of getting into these questions around the collectives, communities. So there are a couple of other spaces where you are experimenting with these modalities. You mentioned collective presencing, inspired dialogues.
Mhm.
What is the context in which these are practiced? Are you part of some other collectives in Brazil or worldwide where you practice these?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm part of a community of practice of Boom Dialogue that is, mm, it's mainly based in the US, but there's me and there's a person from Germany, also a part of the group. And we are working on offering Boom Dialogue as a collective to clients. We did one session with a client. And we are working now on writing, I think it's called white paper. Yeah. I'm not so familiar with with these English terms, but we are working on spreading this practice and also experimenting and understanding what is the impact of a dialogue session for a team. And collective presencing has been a practice that I'm joining also weekly. It has become like a regular practice, and I've done many deep dives throughout the years since 2021 about different topics. Usually, I like to work with taboo topics like money, power, sex, so that we can gather together and speak about the things that we don't find other spaces to speak about, and make meaning.
Since we are entering that part of the conversation around dialogue, again, for a layperson who may use these terms without much awareness of how it might be different from a conversation, for example. Okay, because we were talking about how a flow game enables the very contemplative kind of conversational space, right? So when you speak about bomb inspired dialogue, how would you qualify a dialogue in your way?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking. So there are a few skills, capacities that we practice when we are in dialogue, and we do it intentionally. So listening is one, a big one. Listening in three levels. I'm listening to my own thoughts, I'm listening to you, the other, and I'm listening to the whole group and how meaning is flowing through the group. There's also what we call speaking to the center. So in a dialogue, in a circle, we are not debating and we're not competing to see who has the best perspective and who is right and who is wrong. We're not doing that. We're really surfacing everything that we think and sharing everything to the middle, to the center, and not to one person in particular, So we try to avoid entering in debate. And you're trying to convince the other, and they will defend, and then you will attack. So it's different because we are really paying attention to what is emerging. And these practices are really helpful when you want to understand what is going on inside the system. What are people thinking? What are the beliefs and the patterns of this particular system? And most of the times, people don't have the time and the spaciousness to really sit down and talk in that level. So what happens is that when we try to offer these to organizations, it's like, oh, we have to set aside like 2 hours to do that. That's crazy, right? Depending on the organization. But when the person gets the why and see the benefits of why you do that, because you're really working with all the assumptions that are beneath the system, it's really working like at the source code of your organization. Like, what are people believing? What are they feeling? Why are they acting the way they act? And then usually they get to insights, uh, and then magic can happen, because the experience of collective insight is also something that no one can predict when it will happen. The experience of collective coherence, when the group arrives at that state where we're not fighting anymore, and we are entering like a zone, I have experienced very few times, but it's beautiful when it happens. Do you have that experience? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I think as I listen to you, what I'm hearing is the dialogue also differentiates itself through the act of that multi layered listening to the self, to the other, to the context simultaneously, right? And that opens the possibility for a shift and to see more in the
Mhm.
systems.
Yeah.
So when you were speaking about offering this as a collective, this is what you're meaning, right? Organizations approach you to facilitate dialogue about their system.
Well, I have been more like reaching out to them and offering as a team building experience, usually, especially the flow game. But with Boom Dialogue, I've only done once with this group that I'm part of. And the client that accepted doing the experiment with us, because it was the first time we did it, was a client from someone inside the group. And they were already investing in dialogue because they were training all the employees in dialogue, and then they were open to our process as a collective. So we came in, the eight of us, and we did a fishbowl dialogue. So we came, we listened to them speaking amongst each others about their problem. It was a specific problem. And then they stepped aside and we joined in the center to dialogue between us, just the seven or eight of us. And then later we heard from the team again. So that was the particular design of that session. But you can be very creative on how you do that. I think David Bohm, that's why it's called Bohm Inspired Dialogue. David Bohm was a physicist. And I think the distinction I see in the term he uses is metacognition. So it's our ability to observe not just what we are talking about, but how we are talking about. And that constant observation of the process. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that would be quite helpful to get a perspective of what you mean by dialogue and its potential in both personal and organizational context.
Mhm.
You did mention, as you were speaking about this, about some of the other things that you're part of right now, projects that you are taking up. And you mentioned about you're particularly interested in things that are taboo.
Mhm.
And you mentioned, amongst many things, money, power, and sex. So, can you speak more to that? Why do you consider in today's context these are still a taboo? What
Mhm.
has been your experience which
Ye-
inspired you to work with
Yeah.
them?
Well, I was raised in a Catholic school. And so the topic of sexuality was always a taboo in my upbringing. So for me personally, that was a healing journey to break the taboo and to to come in contact with my own aliveness and really understand what I wanted to do with that, all that energy, the fertility. And I think when it comes to that topic, one thing I like to bring up is the community in Portugal, Tamera, and the way that they center their whole work in love and sexuality, and like researching as a collective what is jealousy, what is monogamy, what are all these social rules that we create and live around, and what is the impact of all that in the ways we live and the ways we just the economy, everything.
Hmm.
So the way we organize ourselves in a society, with families and couples and all that. So when I was, just to give you context, maybe when I was there was a time when it was the same time when I traveled to Austria to get trained as a flow game host. I was also really curious about intentional communities. So I visited a few, including Tamera. And in Tamera, they really have this focus, this research on healing, love, and sexuality, and it's so beautiful the work they're doing, and it's really inspiring. I have different sources of inspiration, but it's not like I have answers actually when it comes to this. So that's why dialogue, it's the tool for this work, because I'm not training others, I'm not teaching others. I am inviting us to gather and think together and feel together so we can make meaning together, so we can understand and be in a posture of curiosity about all that. And, how does that impact our our life decisions, if we want to have children, if we want to get married, what do we do with all that? And I think, I don't know, many people just go about lives without really questioning themselves about all this, which is fine. But for me, I could never just follow. I don't know. I always had that, like, why? And so I think this is what brought me to the taboo topics, because it's where I haven't find anyone able to tell me why. No one could tell me why things work the way they do. So I want to know why. So let's talk. That's the spirit.
It's very interesting because I think one of the most powerful questions to ask is also to just ask why are the things the way they are, and you get very very interesting answers. In your journey with Taboo, right now you have a cohort that you had started earlier this year on breaking taboo, and one of the, I think the subtitles I read for that is a deep dive into love and sex through the lens of innocence. And I'm assuming the innocence is coming in there because there's a lot of shame and guilt associated with these taboo topics. As you take this into your work, integrate it beyond your personal journey into inviting others, how has it been in terms of receptivity? Are people interested? Any learnings you have had so far with this cohort about?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this cohort has been really surprising me. I think I was really lucky. That's why I love collective presencing, because the people it attracts are people who are already committed to a new way of relating. That's my perception. And so for this deep dive, this cohort, we did a series of 5 interviews with women about their experiences of love and sexuality. And we had stories of incest, for example, and how this woman transmuted her experience of incest. She was abused by her father when she was young, really young, and she made like her healing process and everything. And we also had stories of an ex-sex worker, for example, who worked in the 70s as a sex worker, and she was able to also share her story. So we had different guests sharing their stories, and we were really learning from their experiences. So again, not trying to teach anyone anything, but really, that's why the lenses, I choose the word innocence, because we don't know. We really don't know until we ask, right? What is the experience of each individual in this world? So it was really beautiful. And tomorrow we'll have our last interview. And there's also, I don't know, there's a collective learning that is beyond, again, like beyond what I could predict, that happens beyond designing workshops. There is something that happens when we really open up these spaces that it's sometimes mysterious to me, but I keep going because I'm fascinated. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was also a very good space for men, because we had 3 men joining, and they were also sharing their longings, desires, because the invitation for the container was that let's break these taboos. And men are so sometimes ashamed. I mean, you can maybe tell me more with your experience with men's work, but there's a lot of shame that men are experiencing, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. The power of stories, imagined and real, always fascinates. When we combine that with something like collective presencing, helping people to locate themselves in a listening space that is filled with curiosity and innocence, I think it has a lot of healing potential. So thanks for sharing that. So if I were to ask you, what is one burning question that is keeping you alive today? What would that be?
So, well, one of my questions has been about becoming more mature and more confident in my work. So this conversation with you has been really helpful. Like, I'm realizing, like, oh my god, I work with so many different things. um and but yeah, so, and it took 40 minutes to explain what I do. So so um yeah, I mean, part of my inquiry is like, how can I make this accessible to people? If someone is longing for these kinds of spaces, how can they know I exist, and how can I know they exist, and how can we come together, you know? So it's part of my inquiry, and yeah. And also becoming more confident and mature, because I usually am perceived as very young, and people think that I'm very inexperienced, but I've been doing this work for almost 8 years now, working with the flow game, as an entrepreneur, doing these deep dives, offering trainings. I've done a lot of women's work too. I've offered leadership programs for women for 5 years. That was like my main work as a as an entrepreneur here in Brazil, and then I started doing more things in English and internationally. So I think I'm in a bit of a transition space right now, also because for such a long time I was focusing on feminine leadership and helping women, but now I'm opening up to helping anyone. Yeah.
No, that's great. What I have noticed about your work, Amanda, is there are a lot of very interesting experiments that you take up. And that's one of my pulls towards working with you also, because that way I feel that there is some alignment both of us have. So, one of the things I read on your blog, Substack blog, is about the little home that you're building in your compound. And when I was reading about it, I found it very interesting. So those of you who are listening, Amanda is planning to build a space outside her home, and there's this invitation to contribute. You share in that you've been saving up since your teenage days to create something, and you have an idea of what is the extra amount that is required. And I really like the way you articulated it, why you are seeking people to contribute, so that you can uh, design it in a way where it can have a collective space also to host flow games and other things. Do you want to say a little bit about that invitation?
Mm, thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, I've always dreamed of actually buying land here in Brazil and building a space for learning, building a school. You know, I had big dreams, but I've realized like, oh, maybe I need my own space first. Maybe I can build, and that was my father's idea. He said like, why don't you build a tiny home here, and then I have a friend who's an architect, and she offered to help, and that's where it started to take shape. Like, okay, how can this space be? It's a very tiny space. I honestly don't know if I'll be able to receive groups there, but there's such a large garden around it. So maybe the garden is actually the space, where people can come. But there's a desire for me to receive my friends here in Brazil, you know, international friends from Europe and India and the US, people who can come here and maybe stay in this house and experience the beauty and diversity of Brazilian culture. And I think that's also one of my maybe dharmas, to
Mhm.
be a bridge. Yeah, I didn't plan to work internationally, but it just happened. So I end up having many friends who I never met in person. Like, we met in person in Denmark, but I have a few people that I work with, even that I've never met in person. Inviting them to come and stay here and rest, you know, it's a desire for the future, and yeah.
Great. I wish you best with that project too. And on a closing note, in your LinkedIn bio, you have mentioned that you are in the service of the creative impulse of all humans.
Mhm.
So, what is one thing that you would like to share with your listeners on how they can spark that creative impulse?
Great questions, Hari. You're such a good interviewer. um, well, I really believe in the, you know, the small initiatives of artists. I really believe in small scale creativity, you know, artisans working their craft. And I think my craft is dialogue for now, at least. I also do other things, but professionally, this is what I've chosen. And yeah, I think maybe, I don't know, come to our flow game about love. It's my
Why not?
closing note, and then we can talk about it. Yeah, because sometimes we think love, relationships, and creativity are separate. Like our professional life is here, and our relationships are here. But what if that love we feel for someone, what if we could channel that into creation? What if we could see all our collaborations as intimate relationships? So what if we could, you know um, blur these boundaries a little bit? What would be possible? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I think this has been a lovely conversation, and I look forward to our flow game on 22nd of June later this month. Anybody who listened to this podcast, if they have to find out more about the other things that you do, where can they find out?
Okay, so I have a website, is amandazamparo.com. Um, and there are two Substacks. One is for the work I do with sexuality and this research about love. And the other one is about reimagining the future of work. It's we did a conference last year about this, and I was using the Substack as a way to send people the invitations. So it's a place where you can see upcoming sessions and things related with dialogue. Yeah.
Okay. So I shall put that in a description for people to click and navigate to. So thank you, Amanda. I think it's been a lovely conversation, and
Thank
look
you.
forward to working and playing with you in the future.
Yes. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much.